Hello, and welcome to another week of the book CELLAR. Thank you for joining me, and we're going to jump right into this week's book, Mindhunter by John Douglas. Okay, so this week's review is on the true crime novel that I was supposed to read in December, but unfortunately didn't get the time to read it. So I pushed it into January's true crime category, and it's Mindhunter by John E. Douglas. This book was one that I was super excited to read because, as you know, if you've been listening to this show, I am obsessed right now with the new show Mindhunter on Netflix. David Fincher directs, and if you're a David Fincher fan, you know that he really works hard on those dialogue parts. It's not so much action and in-your-face blood and gore. It's more about that intellectual dialogue that we as viewers are going to have with ourselves while watching the show. So because of that, I got really inspired to want to read this book, because the show is based on Mindhunter by John Douglas, who was the main guy that came up with criminal profiling. And what makes Mindhunter, the TV show, so awesome to watch is because we get to watch that unfold. And in the book, you kind of get that same kind of revealing of his life before he became an FBI profiler to kind of what he does now, which is consulting. But before we get on that, we're going to talk a little bit about John Douglas and who he is. So John Douglas joined the FBI in 1970, initially as a sniper, pretty cool, and he was a sniper for the FBI SWAT team. He later became a hostage negotiator. In 1977, he transferred to the FBI's Behavioral Sciences Unit, where he taught hostage negotiations and some criminal psychology that could be applied in the field at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, to new FBI agents. And he soon began traveling across the United States, teaching field agents and local police officers these same methods. So during that time that he was traveling around the country teaching these field agents and local police officers these methods, he also began interviewing serial killers and violent sex offenders in his spare time at various prisons. He felt that these individuals provided a great deal of information and insight into the mind of a killer and would therefore help catch future killers by kind of creating a criminal profiling as we know it as it is today. And that's how it was born. So he created and managed the FBI's criminal profiling program and was later promoted to unit chief of the investigative supportive unit. Some of the notable criminals he interviewed were Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Charles Manson, Dennis Rader, also known as the BTK killer, and Edmund Kemper, just to name a few. And it was from these interviews that he was able to develop a criminal profile of serial killers, consulting on ongoing cases around the country and hoping of helping law enforcement catch the killer. So from his knowledge and information that he gathered from interviewing these killers, he would be able to examine a crime scene and create profiles of perpetrators, describing their habits, predicting their next moves. John Douglas, in some of his interviews, says that it was kind of difficult to separate himself after a case, because in order to be able to properly profile a killer, he would say that he would try to get inside the mind of the killer and the victim. Why this victim? What was it about this victim that was so attracted to this killer? Why? So asking these kinds of questions, you can see how that would keep someone up at night, especially when you're trying to get inside the mind of the serial killer that did this to either a woman. He did a lot of profiles on child killers. The Green River Killer, he was a really big consultant on that case in Seattle. But when his work helped to snare the criminal in question, he would also help build strategies for interrogating and prosecuting them. And you'll kind of see that in the show too. They touch on that a bit. So John Douglas, he worked for 25 years at the FBI, and although he's retired in the field now, he still acts as a consultant in high-profile cases. He has worked over 5,000 cases internationally and was instrumental in developing the concept of criminal profiling. A lot of his coworkers back in the day laughed at him at this concept, and his boss, the director of the FBI, was quite pissed off at the fact that he started interviewing these serial killers without anyone really knowing what he was doing. He was doing it in his free time, trying to kind of help understand more of the psychology of a killer, what's in the mind of a killer, what makes people kill. So John Douglas, and it's no surprise here, has been an inspiration to many law enforcement shows and movies that we know today. TV shows such as Criminal Minds, Hannibal. The character Will Graham was greatly inspired from John Douglas. You especially see that with Will Graham's way he closes his eyes and he gets into the crime scene and sees the way that the killer killed. And then he's therefore able to talk about this is the kind of killer he is. He is lonely, or, he obviously has to work for a security company, or et cetera, et cetera. Also, his own TV show is based on Mindhunter, the book, as well as the movie and character from those movies, Silence of the Lambs. Silence of the Lamb. Lambs? Yeah. So he has been an inspiration for a lot of criminal shows that we know today. And that's no surprise. If he was the person to coin the concept criminal profiling, I mean, he started all of this. And what's crazy is back in the 1970s is when we had a lot of those serial killers kind of out in the community and really big. I feel like in today's society, we don't hear about that as much. And so you think like, oh, is there less serial killers? Is it because of DNA evidence? Is it because, we're just able to catch them a lot quicker before they're able to do their serial killings? Are we catching these serial killers, their first or second kill, when back in the 1970s, they could have been killing, 5, 6 to 10 people? And that's something that we kind of talk about a lot on various forums that I go on for serial killer talk. It's definitely a topic that's really popular in our culture. And I do find myself talking to a lot of my friends who also share this kind of interest in this subject. So going off on that, I was super excited to read this book because this kind of started everything. So before we talk about the book review and how I felt about it, we're going to take a quick break. So make sure to stay tuned and hear what I felt about the book.
There's nothing quite as satisfying as a good conversation with intelligent company.
Join comedian Don Smith every week as he sits down and talks with comedians, actors, filmmakers, writers, and everyday schmoes. It's The Life with Don Smith, Wednesdays at noon on 106.9 FM, and now available on the Eventide Entertainment podcast feed every Friday on Spreaker, YouTube, and iTunes. Nothing brings people together quite like the movies, and every week Aaron Lopez wants you to join him in a discussion about the latest and greatest in the world of film. So grab a drink, grab some popcorn, and get comfy. Come join Aaron and friends every Thursday at The Drive-In, presented by Eventide Entertainment.
Thank you, Eventide Entertainment, for showing us all the awesome shows that are in this wonderful community we have going on. But let's get into my book review of Mindhunter. So, as I said, I've been really excited to read this ever since I binge watched the show. Just because I wanted to hear from the person himself of how he started this crazy idea of criminal profiling and how it became kind of a necessary building block for law enforcement today. Now, with that said, I will say right off the top of my head, I was a bit let down in the book. I gave it a 4 out of 5. So that tells you right now that I really, really liked it. So I wasn't let down. But there were some pieces missing. So this book, Mindhunter, Inside the FBI's Elite Serial Crime Unit by John E. Douglas, as well as he also had a ghostwriter help him. It's about 400 pages in a paperback. It's kind of a little steep. It's not too bad, though. I had the hard copy, and I felt like I could read it pretty quickly. It was published August 1st, 1996. It was a nominee for 2 awards, Best Crime and Edgar Award nominee for Best Fact Crime, but it did not win. However, this is a book that I've seen kind of talked about a lot in the psychology criminal world. And a lot of people do like this. This has an average rating of 4 out of 5 on Goodreads, and on Amazon, I think it was only like 8% of reviews were under 5 stars. So that's kind of incredible. And I didn't see any ratings that were 1 or 2 stars. So people, for the most part, the audience that this book attracts, the people really enjoyed it. I, for one, was one of them. Now, there were issues that I had with the book, but I think we can kind of overlook those because of the amount of detail that was given in this book. So basically, it kind of goes over his whole entire career as an FBI criminal profiler. Kind of talks about his consulting work, talks about him growing up, and maybe what kind of spurred this obsession of psychology and why and how he got into the FBI. So we kind of learn about his home life and who he was before he was in the FBI. And so that was kind of interesting to kind of get to know who he was before all this started. But the book kind of starts right bam in the middle of kind of a health crisis he was having when he was consulting on the Green River Killer in Seattle, Washington, back in the 90s, I believe. Now, I will say that there's no coherent lines to divide, like, when he's talking about his cases and the amount of detail he goes into, like, how he was able to profile somebody, how he used his interview from John Wayne Gacy and how that helped him with another killer. He kind of talks about the Atlanta child murders, which was kind of his biggest case that threw him into stardom, I guess you could say. One of his big, giant cases back in the 70s. But the reason I say it's not very good being, like, coherent, because one minute he's talking about being in the FBI and kind of the role he had, and then all of a sudden he's diving into these super details of a crime, talking about the killer, what he sees in commonalities between different killers, like characteristics. And that kind of left me confused sometimes, because normally in books you kind of get like, okay, this is the first bit of the book I'm going to talk about before. And then the rest of the book is going to be kind of my criminal profiling experience. And let me talk about cases. It's kind of intermittently thrown in the book. So I wonder if that's a device to keep readers wanting to read, because we want to hear about those criminal profile cases. We want to hear about how you caught the Atlanta child murderer, how you helped with the finding of Ted Bundy, and etc. That is what readers want to read. So I think by throwing pieces of, like, his life in there kind of made us keep reading, because we're like, okay, whatever, we'll read this to get to the really interesting stuff, to the meat of the story. But at the same time, you're kind of like, dude, this is boring. You talk about yourself a lot. You talk about how great of a profile you are. And anybody that kind of gets irritated at people talking about how great they are about themselves, I felt myself rolling my eyes so far back in my head sometimes. Like, he talks about how he's so great at criminal profiling. Okay, great. But there has to be cases out there that you consulted on that you got wrong. It's impossible to say that every single case you were on, you got right. But we never hear about the mistakes he made, or, hindsight 2020, not seeing something that was right in front of him. He kind of very much, it seems, a little ego stroking. which kind of gets irritating and frustrating in the book. So that's why I gave it a 4 out of 5. It would have been a 5 out of 5 if it was a little less egotistical. Kind of got irritating on that front. But overall, it was fascinating to hear about the criminal profiling from the get-go, how it was created, how he developed this through interviews, and then kind of remembering watching the show and seeing how great the writer for the show was able to implement such juicy meat pieces from the novel and throw it in the show. The show is outstanding. I 100% recommend the show. I do recommend the book. If you are into psychology, if you like your mind to think in this subject, I would definitely read this. I will say that it will get frustrating, but the best parts of the book definitely outweigh the irritating, frustrating parts. If he could just boast a little less, that would be probably really great. But otherwise, I loved learning about his thoughts on different crimes. It kind of got me to watch a lot of YouTube videos of his interviews. He did this really cool interview where he talked about if Hannibal was a real serial killer out there, how he would have interviewed him. And listening to that interview just kind of like so cool, because I realized that I kind of have a similar brain as far as I get very much hung up on the smallest of details, and I think about it over and over again, and how can I the way his mind works. He brings his work home with him, but in such a way that it's like his mind is always thinking about it. He may be, with his kids, kind of trying to separate himself from his work, but his brain is always thinking about other theories, other ideas. What else can he do? And I find myself also doing that in my own career, as well as things that really fascinate me. So it's really awesome to have been able to read a book from somebody that was so profoundly important to the way that we find criminals today. I do recommend it. If you love criminal stuff, get on in this. 4 out of 5. So that's my rating for this book. Hope this interests you. I know it was a book from 1996, but I thought I could throw it in there just because we have the show Mindhunter that just came out on Netflix in October. I would recommend that. Go watch it. You will not be disappointed. It means David Fincher. I love David Fincher. Great director. Anyway, I hope you have a great week, and I hope you enjoyed this review. I will see you next week.